this is an interesting, it's interesting for me because my students worked on the Canadian Sikhs, the Sikhs that enlisted here in Canada. There were 10 that through research were able to be identified, and all my students had some of these soldiers. In particular, I'll credit Lauren and Lydia, two of my students who actually did the bulk of the research on Lashman Singh. So Lashman Singh, we also called him Lal or Loal, was born in the Punjab region of India on January 15, 1885. He was 5'8" with a dark complexion, black eyes and black hair, and his previous occupation was listed as a laborer. He was a single man who lived with his brother Dalip back in India. It's not clear when he came to Canada, but he most likely emigrated shortly before the start of the war. There are no listed reasons for his immigration and subsequent enlistment in the Canadian war effort, but one theory suggests that issues arising out of the Punjab region of India in the early 1900s may have played a role. They had a Punjab Land Alienation Act, and this forced the Sikh population at that time to leave the region because the land was expropriated by the government. So they lost their land. They had to leave. On September 7th, 1915, he enlisted in the town of Smiths Falls, Ontario, and he joined the 75th Battalion, Central Ontario Regiment. Now, why would a Sikh with no links, ties to this small town enlist in Smiths Falls, Ontario? Well, we don't know. We can assume that there are a few reasons, one of which is that Smiths Falls, in the early part of the 20th century, well, late 19th and early 20th, was a very popular railway hub between the large cities of Kingston, Toronto, Ottawa, and Montreal. So that could be the reason why he was on a train and he stopped in Smiths Falls and ended up enlisting here. In his attestation papers, it's noted that he had no prior military experience. We have since discovered in a letter that he wrote that he may have spent over 3 years in the Indian Army before coming to Canada. So we're still not sure about that. There's a bit of a contradiction. This contradiction could be the result of a simple mistake or a language barrier with the enlistment officer, because if they were, they may not have spoken English very well. The language barrier may have caused some information to be missed or whatnot. So this happened a lot in those times, especially with the immigrant population. Another peculiarity found in his attestation papers is his affiliation with the Church of England. It's more likely a mistake that was made, again by an enlisting officer due to his perceptions or lack of knowledge of the Sikh religion. Because if you look at the attestation papers, you will never find, it'll say other. So when they can't figure out what religion that really is, they'll pick one. And we found that with a lot of the Sikh soldiers is that the Church of England, I think, was picked 5 times out of the 8 or 10 that were researched. Sorry, this is all wet. So I'll talk a little bit about his medical records. He was actually a very healthy soldier. So for the time that he fought, the only thing that came out in his records were on March 1st, he was diagnosed with a venereal sore on his face. And so we can assume probably that he had a little bit of leave time before that. 4 days later, on March 5th, he was admitted to the hospital, and he was basically told that he had a venereal disease. And he was there for 2 months. This seems to be the only issue. So c'est un STD.
Oh,
okay, maladie, c'est ça. Ouais. His military movements: on September 8, 1915, Lashman Singh, now 30 years old, was transferred from the 75th Battalion to the 80th. You'll notice that there's quite a bit of movement with him. He sailed to England on a ship called the Baltic on May 16th. He arrived in England on May 30th, and on June 13th, he was transferred again to the 74th Battalion. He and his battalion arrived in the harbor Le Havre in mid-August of 1916. By December, he's temporarily assigned to the 11th Canadian Infantry Brigade Tunneling Company, and he was sent to the field. Later, again transferred back to the 75th Battalion. There's a reason why I'm saying all this. It seems that many of his movements coincide with incidents that led him to be disciplined more than once by the Canadian military. So a lot of movement, all linked to something that happened to him, a discipline of some form. So Lashman's time during the war seemed riddled with problems. In January of 1917, while staying with his billets, we talked about the region having lots of billets, he was sentenced to 7 days without pay due to fighting after lights out. He was told to pay his rent and also to find another billet. Later in October, Lashman forfeited 10 days of pay when he was found guilty of being absent without leave, AWOL. His problems didn't end there. In November 1917, he was kept in confinement awaiting trial on a fairly serious accusation of striking a superior officer and using insubordinate language to a superior officer. This latest offense caused him to lose pay for 90 days. A letter written by Loal Singh was found by Dr. David Gray. He's a historian from Manotick, Ontario. I'd like to share with you a snippet, if it works on my iPad, I hope, a snippet from Dr. Gray's documentary. In this, the letter that Loal Singh wrote in his defense at his court-martial, you will hear his words narrated by someone else. So basically his defense was that he had never done anything wrong, that he was accused of stealing money because he had money on him, and the superior officer did not think that he should have that kind of money, and he thought that he had stolen it. And so being accused of stealing something then tarnished his whole reputation, and it stayed with him. So he was basically, at this point here, what I believe would be a victim of some racism. Accusations that were not really proven, and then if he's accused of striking a superior officer, in the letter he says, I never struck anyone, I never went into the kitchen, I never saw that officer. Why is that happening? And I think that's one of the big questions with Lashman and a lot of the other soldiers that were part of minorities, is how were they treated? How were they targeted more? He seems to have been targeted quite a bit for various offenses that, for the most part, he claims were exaggerated, were not true. In June of the following year, he once again suffered a loss in pay, along with the punishment of being assigned a housewife on housewife duty. So this is very interesting. He was a housewife for 9 days. Basically, he did all the crappy work for the officers, the superior officers. All of this because he negligently lost his kit. So he was a soldier. He, again, in his letter said, I have been in the military in India. That's where that problem in information happened, because he said he had been in the military for 3 months, 3 years back in India. And so he says, I have this experience. I would have never lost my kit. I wouldn't have done anything like that. At one point, he's also accused, like I said earlier, of leaving without permission and going AWOL. Again, why would soldiers do that? There are many reasons. Maybe his was something that wasn't really related to not wanting to be part of the war anymore, but maybe the treatment that he was getting. Again, we don't know. All of this, it's safe to say that ethnicity, color, and or religion may have played a part in Private Singh's experience while enlisted in the Canadian Army. I believe that his already difficult life during the war was aggravated by the fact he was seen as different. And I also believe that he was not alone to suffer through prejudice and racism. Loal Singh died in action on October 24th, 1918. He, like over 100,000 other Sikh soldiers who fought in World War I, participated in the war's major battles. but their story is not often told. Loal Singh was one of 2 soldiers out of a group of 7 who reached the bank safely after crossing the bridge of the Canal du Nord in October 1918. He was killed shortly after crossing over, and we have Jay Nadeau, who is the other soldier that survived along with him, and he's right next to him. He was first buried in the churchyard at Belaing Church, about 7 kilometers west of Valenciennes. The town of Belaing built a memorial in honor of the First World War Canadian soldiers who had fallen near the town while fighting for the Allies. In the 1930s, Loal Singh's body was exhumed and reburied here in the Arras Road Cemetery. At a time when Sikhs were actively prevented from immigrating to Canada and were denied Canadian citizenship, those men joined with other Canadians to fight in Europe. Barriers such as language and culture were without a doubt present, but they were volunteers who fought, and some died for a country which denied them even the basic rights of citizenship. The group of Sikh immigrants to which Loal Singh belonged did not get their stories told until quite recently. And there is yet a lot more work to do to bring recognition to those immigrants who fought and died for Canada. On Tuesday, June 19th of this year, I'm proud to report that Loal Singh's name was added to the Smiths Falls Cenotaph, along with another Sikh soldier by the name of Warriam Singh. Many people in the community came together to make this moment happen and to celebrate this very special event. This long overdue commemoration of a soldier who fought alongside his Canadian comrades on the battlefields of France has finally been granted. We need only continue to right the wrongs and made long ago by keeping their stories alive and finding more to add in their narrative, lest we forget.